Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Neva Gusak, your host of the Politically Homeless podcast. With me is blogger and writer, and I would say even investigative journalist, Lauren Morris. She is one of the moderators slash leaders of Conservatives in Support of Ukraine, which is an excellent Facebook group for supporters of Ukrainian independence in the face of Russian aggression. Welcome to the show, Lauren. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Nice to have coffee and a chat about stuff nobody else wants to talk about.
Well, actually, instead of coffee, which I'm going to get later at work, I have an old specialty of boiled ginger root that I boil in a pot with freshly squeezed lime. That's a long story how I got into that. Maybe we can go into a different show. It has to do with the relationships I'm in and been in. So people teach you new things. And they tend to stick. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Otherwise, I can talk about personal stuff until the cows come home to roost. And thank you again. Thank you so much. And today we're going to talk about your website and a particular article that really caught my attention. It's on your website, thecentrisinc.org. And it's about a personality and organization that I follow pretty closely called the Center for Political Innovation, which is not a political party. It's a think tank as it bills itself, a sort of clearinghouse for Marxist-Leninist with American characteristics causes. It's led by Caleb Maupin. Now, you actually met Caleb Maupin, or at least went to one of his events, and I always like to get whether it's from former communists or former fascists or people who go into these meetings, they engage with these people. I'm always kind of curious on who they really are, what kind of personalities are involved, really the vibe you get from them and stuff like that, because I think it's very important to kind of pierce beneath the veil. So, and you mentioned some interesting points in your opinion paragraph over here that caught my eye as well. But I wanted to go over just in general, you've had quite a bit of experience, I've told, in your metropolitan area with the left, with communist groups and whatnot. We're going to talk about that as well. But first, could you tell us about what centrist.org represents? What is a centrist in your viewpoint?
That's a great opening question. The original definition of this, I mean, like the old definition of this is before it was weaponized by politics and became a weapon for people to use against each other, it is defined as someone who listens. And for me, because I'm a pro audio engineer, and have spent a lot of time listening for a living, that was just, right on. And so then also knowing that it is a political word now, it's weaponized by the right as, well, if you're a centrist, then you're kind of non-committed, and you're somebody that just kind of sits on the fence and just doesn't really do anything, which I think is a false. And it's not really so much weaponized on the left, I guess. The Democrats kind of like that word. So it's just, I am somebody who listens. And, I am somebody who has never been a hard Republican or a hard Democrat here in the United States. I vote for policy, and I vote for my conscience. And when I first got here to Austin, and well, not when I first got here to Austin, but when Trump ran for office and became a candidate, I noticed immediately that a lot of people here in Austin, my musician friends in particular, this viciousness came out of them. And this hatred for the Republican Party was something that I had never, ever in my entire life experienced. And they went on this crusade. And I had close friends who I played music with, for years and were really close to, said, well, if you support Trump, we just can't be friends anymore. And so, so is basically that. But before we go any further in terms of my website, I did open a website called thecentristInc.org. I opened a 501c3 to hopefully fund some of my activities in my journalism. But I've recently decided just to go back to my regular website, which is at laurencamellemorris.com. And I've opened a page for the centrist on there, which I will, post our updates as well. But a 501c3 nonprofit is not cheap to run, and websites are quite expensive, and the cost just keeps going up. So I just feel like it's not really worth it anymore to have that type of entity. So I'm going to be closing that down.
Well, that's a shame because there is some good information on there, but hopefully maybe it can get transferred or archived somehow.
Oh yeah, I'll transfer it over to my regular website, which I've had for many years since I've started writing, and it'll just have its own tab. And of course, the people that I follow and work with, their content is going to be on there as well. So nothing's going to change, just a different address.
Yeah, well, I hear you. The price of everything is going up, and up, and it has been
Yeah.
for most of my life, if you will. Born in 1974, so gives you an idea of my age. And
I'm older than you.
that's all right. That's all right. I'm going to be 50 in about a week, so feeling 50 is pretty nifty, so it's all good. Um, so yeah, that's a good, interesting definition of centrism. The way I would define centrism, at least politically, is a midpoint between outright collectivist totalitarianism, if you will, total political, economic, and social control, and that of completely laissez-faire liberalism or plutocracy or whatnot. And it's a sort of midpoint that developed and really was an idea that had very good stewardship over the country from about the New Deal era until its slow unraveling, beginning at the end of the Carter years and then especially Reagan and onwards, with the economic layer of protections and the anti-communist consensus on the foreign policy ground. That type of centrism, where you had a political hero of mine, the former U.S. Senator Scoop Jackson from Washington, if you remember Scoop Jackson, very pro-labor, very much colorblind populist and civic nationalist, but very strong anti-communist. Those forces were pushed out of the Democratic Party, and unfortunately, our national defense and internal security structures were under assault, intellectually at least, by the new left, often joining hands with the old left, meaning the CPUSA and whatnot, which, of course, people will say, well, the CPUSA has always been small since about the mid-1940s, but I say that even though they might be on the surface a small group of individuals, they exert a tremendous power that basically is out of proportion for its size. So that's kind of my definition of centrism. There's a good quote by an actual centrist who was Arthur Schlesinger Jr. He wrote a book called The Vital Center back in 1947. And his view of the vital center would require individualism, which does not wall man off from community. We require community which sustains but not suffocate the individual. So it's really kind of an ideology that's either, when you say that, you'll have people on the right that'll say, well, that's communism or fascism, because there's a lot of ideological tribalism, and used to be, or still am maybe, a man of the right, or I don't know what I am anymore sometimes. And then on the left, they would view that, well, it depends on the type of leftist. If it's with my type of goals, they would view it with suspicion, because my long-term goal is to perpetuate the United States of America in perpetuity. And the left would be split on that. You would have the hard left, that would obviously that wants to defeat the United States, however they may want to spin it. And then you have the remnants of the Scoop Jackson left, and I would say portions of your average union worker, non-union worker, small business person that wants that would ascribe to some sort of social democratic ideology combined with capitalism, but they want to do that as a measure, as a tool to promote America. So that's kind of my view on centrism. And I don't know if you agree or disagree or, or whatnot. But now if you don't mind telling us, if you're not comfortable telling us where you are, that's fine. It's not a problem. So where are you located? Because my question is going to be kind of hinging on that point, if you don't
I'm
mind.
in the Austin area.
Okay, great. And I'm in Broward County in Florida. So in the Austin area is kind of a sea of hardcore leftism, from what I understand, and a sea of very conservative Texas, the other red, so to speak. Um, and Austin has always kind of had a very hard left element there, shall we say, that's probably not really in sync with both of our views. But from what I understand, you've kind of examined the hard left scene. You've been to some of their meetings, their gatherings. So before we talk about CPI, could you tell us a little bit about your adventures in Leftland in Austin?
Yeah, I found myself going to a rally, I suppose, and at the Capitol. And it was a conservative rally. And I heard their complaints and gripes. And I met some people, and I started going to more rallies and meeting people and just really listening. And this was when Hillary and Trump were running against each other. And I wanted to, just kind of get an idea about things. And then um, someone had asked me to write some articles um, about Drag Queen Story Hour. And so I began investigating those people and writing some articles. I have a extensive history of experience with Iranian Muslims, going clear back to my childhood. So threats to our national security and threats to our country and our way of life really became prominent in my mind. And I started having a lot of memories about my experience with Islam, and just everything just started, getting to a boiling point. And I started researching and writing, and then I started just doing a lot more of that, and the blog started developing. And communism wasn't really anything that I had learned about in school, but of course, it started playing out on the streets of Austin. Antifa was there, and I learned about the Red Guard, Austin Red Guard, and just one thing, Nevin, just really led to another. And I found myself with a lot of time to research and study and learn about the threats that were actually playing themselves out in a ground domination on the streets of Austin, Texas. And I saw what the communists were doing. I saw what Islam was doing. And I've just continued to watch it and report on it. And in my view, there's no better way to find out about this kind of thing than to really mix with it and go out on the street and see it. And that was an experience that I had as a child with a group of Iranians that moved into my town when I was a little girl. And so, when you're researching online, you are absorbing somebody else's experience. And I like to go out and get my own. And Austin was a front row seat to a lot of that kind of activity because we are the capital of Texas. So I went out and observed and learned as much as I could on the ground.
And
Yeah.
that's, oh, excuse me. Yeah, and that's an excellent way to find out, is to really see what's going on the ground so you can, as you said, come up with your own opinion. And when you came face to face with the Austin Red Guard, what did you interact with those individuals? Did you talk to them? Did you just kind of, passively observed their actions? Could you tell us a little bit about the Austin Red Guard, what they represented in your own eyes? Forget even what you might have read online or their published statements and whatnot. What was your take on them? Why they joined up into that particular group, which is a sort of Maoist Antifa type of organization, from what I understand? So tell us a little bit about that, what you observed about them, please.
Well, their base camp was the University of Austin. They had the opportunity to organize on campus. They A lot of them lived in the same neighborhood, and so they just became, this militant group. And there was a young lady who I really became fascinated with, who led the group. She's from an Islamic family, although she is not Sharia compliant. And she became the front person for a lot of this activism that was going on in Austin. She's a true revolutionary and believes in revolution. And when COVID happened, and so their first campaign was the anti-police campaign, and so their causes were to rattle the police department significantly for cops that had shot Black and brown people, and they were, and she herself and Red Guard at the time started a group called the Mike Ramos Brigade. And they were kind of rivals with a Black Lives Matter group here called the Austin Justice Coalition, who are actually a 501c3. But they aligned together on their, assault teams to get the police defunded, and they were successful. And so what was interesting to me was when COVID happened and the entire music industry in Austin was shut down, every venue, everything. And, considering that we are the live music capital of the world, that's really saying something. Well, she and her team basically took over the streets with a distorted bullhorn and rampaged around the streets as often as possible. And their numbers grew and grew and grew. And so I had the opportunity to go out and hear their speeches, their rallies, and their riots, and watch them square off with our police department and everybody else that would come in different departments, the troopers, the rangers, what have you, and watch them literally physically square off with the police in the streets and chant and abuse the police. And then you also see all these other actors that are around as well. You see Fusion Center people, you see undercover FBI agents, you just see all kinds of people, and you see people on both sides. And because, Texas is such a pro Second Amendment state, the militias were coming out and they were armed. And, so the narrative sprung up, and I could see that the local newspapers and the mainstream media supported these groups. In fact, they supported them so much that on Friday night, news at 5 o'clock news or 4:30 news, they would announce where the rioters were going to be and whose city councilman's house they were going to riot in front of and what was the address and where the meetup was. I mean, it was just incredible. And so we had a newspaper out here called the Chronicle, which used to be a music newspaper. It just full on turned into a commie hate rag. And it's never really returned to its full glory. Austin has not returned to its full glory. South by Southwest has been just destroyed by politics. And so this whole town really had a blanket of communism over it. Our last mayor, Mayor Adler, knelt in the street with the fist of power up in the air right alongside Black Lives Matter. There was communist graffiti all over town. I went all over and I photographed it. And it was just really something to watch. And we had major riots here where there were a couple of real significant ones where there was a great deal of property damage. And they just rampaged through the streets unimpeded. And it finally came to a head on an evening in the summer where we had a young man marching with them, was carrying his brand new AK-47, and his name was Garrett Foster. And an off-duty sergeant named Daniel Perry, who was Ubering in Austin to make some extra money, crossed their path and got in the middle of their police escorted, march through the town. And Garrett Foster raised his AK-47 at Daniel Perry, who returned fire and shot him 5 times in the chest and killed him. So because of our hard leftist progressive DA, who is one of the most notorious in the United States, his name is Garza, Jose Garza. He's a Soros-funded and planted DA, brought charges against Daniel Perry for murder. He was successful because, in my view, Daniel Perry's counsel didn't really understand the enemy that they were up against, and put some that's a story in itself right there. I mean, the drama with that was just incredible. Daniel Perry was convicted, went to jail for murder, and Governor Abbott pardoned him a couple of years later. His life was completely shattered. We had several police officers indicted for harming protesters, with these beanbag rounds they were shooting at them. 21 indictments for police officers. They've had their lives shattered. They too have not had effective counsel, in my opinion. Those charges on, I think, 19 of them have recently been dropped. We've had just the communist effect on Austin and how it infiltrates into the city council and everything. We had an equity commission set up, and during COVID, if you were a venue who wanted COVID money, you had to sit through 3 days of undoing racism classes with this, communist Black Lives Matter person named Joyce James, who would suppress your white supremacy, and you had to sit through these and check your white privilege and be scorecarded by an equity commission in order for you to get COVID money to keep your music venue alive. And they went so far as to try to even, exercise some control over our bands here by, telling everybody that your music band, your band had to be diverse. Well, when you have 57% of the people in Austin are white, 27% are that play music, are Mexican, and 8% are Black or other persons of color. Diversity in your band, it just doesn't matter. It matters who is competent, who you vibe with, and who can play their instrument. So that went down the toilet really quickly. But they did these money grabs and these power grabs, and it was just disgusting.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who, I'm not going to get into it now, a friend of mine who I used to work with, he moved back to his native North Carolina, got a position as a librarian, and he lost his job because he would not go along with, at his branch and in his region of the library. They had a rather unpleasant combination of wokeism and Stalinism wrapped
Right.
up in one. And he was on the receive. He basically got dumped all over. They made a mountain out of a molehill about certain very minor infractions, if anything, while they committed worse infractions. And he got fired from his job a couple of years before retirement. And North Carolina is a right to work state, so there's no unions whatsoever. The library system he works for, there's no union, which is interesting. This has always fascinated me how the politics of the anti-labor right kind of meet conveniently are used by the Stalinist left to enforce their goodwill. That's one of the reasons why I've come to believe in checks and balances, not only in quote unquote big government, but also in the various social economic factors too as well, because each component in the process in society has their validity and worth and needs to be heard and respected. But I digress. How did this start in Austin? I know we got to talk about the CPI, but this is very interesting history. It's disturbing. It's not surprising. How did this all start in Austin? Because Austin, for people who are not Texans like myself, we've always heard about Austin as kind of like a sea of Stalinist, Maoist red in a sea of, very, very conservative or very pro-freedom, pro-U.S. Sentiments all over the rest of Texas. So what happened to Austin? Was it always like that, or
Well, I
did
think Austin has a lot of old guard here, anti-war people, and from the 70s and that kind of thing, and they've settled here. Austin has always had a hippie culture, and it was never really expected to grow like it is now. I mean, they never developed the freeways to handle the cars that are on them now. And at some point, it exploded economically, and the music is, the main reason for the explosion of the population growth in Austin, and it also being the capital seat, and then it became a tech sector as well. But as far as the politics advancing like it did, that was when Chaz Moore of the Austin Justice Coalition showed up with a Black Lives Matter cause, and he started going to meetings and whatnot, and he wanted to establish a police oversight commission. And he is racist against white people, and it just really ramped up in start it and began in 2014, as far as I can see. Also, in 2012, the current president of UT Austin, who was, I think he's got a Russian history, maybe. I'd have to go back and look. I wrote an article about UT Austin on my blog that talks about the history of that school. It became very far left. And, I believe that we had professors and teachers that came in that were definitely themselves very communist. and taught revolutionary and were allowed to teach revolutionary theory among the students in Austin. And so they were very much willing to go out onto the streets and march for these anti-capitalist and anti-police campaigns. So, you know, I think when he died, when this president died in 2012, he was, I think, the one that seemed to, in my view, keep control of it getting too radical, you know, and too far out of control. Because it seemed to me that after he died, Antifa and Red Guard saw their opportunity to come in and grab some control of the school. And that's when they started exercising these struggle sessions on campus, and they started targeting professors on campus who had some problems with, you know, dealings with young ladies and young students. And if you were a police officer, you know, you were a murderer. If you were a professor, you were a sexual abuser, these kinds of things. So they found targets, they targeted them relentlessly and brutally, and they committed crimes in doing it. And one of our professors in Austin committed suicide over it. Yeah.
Real cost of communism right here. I mean, if it was up to me, based on what you're telling me, and this is, I've read things about the Austin Red Guard here and there, and the various Maoist-oriented
Right.
Antifa groups. Like I remember one, I think it's the Revolutionary something or another movement, which says liberation begins when America dies. I mean, these groups need to be investigated at bare minimum, infiltrated if they're not already by the local police intelligence and FBI. And they also need to be thrown the hell off of campus. I'm all for exchanging ideas, even people having a right to speak and debate and discuss different issues, even if we don't agree. That's fine. That's my sort of academic librarian type of side coming in. But when you're going on full-fledged authoritarianism like that,
Right.
that's when it ends. That's when you need to be thrown the hell off of campus. That's just my personal opinion. Now, have you ever talked to these individuals and had conversations? Because I find some of the most fascinating revelations come from people like Larry Grathwall or Brandon Darby, who have actually had conversations with these individuals, and they gain their confidence and they tell about what their plans are. Let's say they gain power in Texas or even the United States, because I think it's important to publicize this, in part because this is who you're really dealing with. You know, all the peace and the military, anti-militarism and all these quote unquote anti-war, which is a misnomer in my opinion, is all just a farce. It's basically like the Bernie Madoff of politics. They're basically defrauding the people. That's what it comes down to. That's what always turned me off about the left, as I pointed out in my Substack piece, What is Radical Civic Nationalism, is because they want their country that they were born in, namely the United States, to lose, basically. You know, to quote Paul Goodman, alienation was a new leftist. Alienation is when your country, you don't want your country to win a war, in a sense get defeated and whatnot. And to me, that always left a very bad taste in my mouth. You know, my stepfather was always an anti-communist, very suspicious of the old Soviet Union. And so I always was kind of raised in a very anti-communist position, which is something that I've never let go of because history has proven him correct, unfortunately. So have you ever had conversations with these people? You ever sit down with them? I know in the music world, they were extremely harsh and closed-minded, given you obviously confided your political views to them on Trump. But have you ever sat down with these Red Guard people or whatever, before we go into the CPI meeting, the Center for Political Innovation? Have you ever sit down and tried to have conversations with these people?
No, because they every time that I've gone out It's been for a rally and a protest, and it's been a real volatile situation.
Yeah.
So, and I also find too that they don't really want to talk to you about stuff. They know that you're the enemy, and so they don't want to talk to you. However, I have to say, the last event that I went to was a, a pro Gaza event after October 7th. And I went up to, there was a guy there from Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and he had a booth. And I went up and I talked to him, and he was very, open to talking to me, which I find most of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization people are. The Red Guards aren't going to talk to you, but the communists from Dallas that come to Austin, they'll talk to you, especially if they have a table and they have their brochures and their information. So I talked to him a little bit, and a student walked by, and wanted to talk to me, and just assumed that because I was an older white woman, much older than him anyway, because he's a young 20 something, he was assuming that I had a certain position, and we had a great conversation. And he realized that I wasn't necessarily who he thought I was. And he listened to me, and I saw a couple of bells go off in his head. And so I do believe that conversation is important, but when it comes to the Red Guards, you're not likely to have a conversation with them, because they are in a militant frame of mind when they are out there on the street and they are doing a job.
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. Now, I know for the sake of time, otherwise we could probably double the time of this interview, but um, you came across the Center for Political Innovation. And I think they're very clever communists. They're very smart because they realize that the attitudes of the Red Guard are very antagonistic, and frankly, they piss people off. Uh, and they realize that they have to wrap themselves up with the American flag. That's my opinion of what they do. And that's something that communists have done historically. And our good friend Trevor Loudon and I recently had a show where we talked about that. The CPUSA has done that. Communism is the 20th century Americanism, as I said, in the 1930s. I kid you not, that was a slogan of theirs. Even in 2017, the CPUSA's website had an article which basically said many of the same things that the CPI said. Stop burning the American flag, stop cursing America. We're anti-American capitalism, but not anti-American. And they had a very tactical, strategic reasoning behind writing that particular article. Moving forward, how did you find out about the CPI, or CPI USA as they're officially called, Center for Political Innovation? Could you tell us a little bit about them and how you learned that they would be moving on into Austin?
Yeah, well, I found them to be hilarious, and it was really entertaining. And if they come back, I'll go and see them again because it was a show. And I chuckle when I think about it. It wasn't, I didn't know what to expect, but I noticed that I think there was an advertisement either online with the Chronicle, or it was actually in the Chronicle, but they had a graphic that they were posting it, and they came in on May 4th on 2022, which I believe was Thursday. It was a Thursday, maybe it might have been a Friday, but it was right before the music part of South by Southwest kicked off, I believe. And so I thought that was interesting that they would come, to try to get some people in the seats. Well, they were at a hotel on the east side of 35, in an area where it's just it's just a different kind of area over there. We'll say that there's transients and it's off on the freeway and so there's homeless over there and all that kind of thing. And so we were having a real homeless issue, which was another thing that the Black Lives Matter and the Red Guards were involved in. And Austin just filled up with homeless in all these areas. So that was one of the areas where they were. And so I went there, and it was an interesting thing. Ask me. I think I lost your question, but that's how I found out about them. Was they had done some advertising. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you went to the meeting, what were some, I know it's an open-ended question, but what were some of your observations? Because I saw parts of it, of course, online, and it seemed like the seats were filled. They had quite a number of people. They
Okay.
are a total of 160 people, according to its ideological leader, Caleb Maupin. And what was your impression of the meeting, the personalities, and whatnot?
So it was funny. It was in this hotel. It was in a meeting room in this hotel. And the meeting, you go there and everybody was outside of the meeting room. And they had a couple of armed guards and they had a couple of plainclothes guys, which I'm sure were armed anyway. And they did a lot of vetting before you even got into the room. You had to show your ID, and they searched you. They wanded you down, and if you had a purse, they wanted to look in your purse. Well, I went there with just a little Lumix camera, and they wanted me to go. They didn't want me to bring my camera inside. And they wanted me to go, back out into the parking lot and put it in my car. And I said, I'm not doing that, not leaving my camera in that parking lot. And I don't want to go out there, again. And so they decided that I was okay. And so the meeting didn't start for an hour and a half because they were doing all this vetting, and you go into the room, and if you look at the picture on my website, there's this big plastic bust of Abraham Lincoln, and then it had, some of their banners and swag and stuff around it, which I thought was really interesting, their communist flags. And so anyway, they had a guy who was playing classical music this whole time. And the room finally filled up. And before the event started, they had a table. I thought they would have a lot more information on the table, but they didn't. But it was all books. There wasn't any brochures. So I spent about $50 and grabbed up a bunch of books. And there's photographs of some of that stuff that I grabbed and sat down and listened to the music. They did both the Russian anthem, national anthem, and they did the American national anthem. And they had this procession of the speakers that kind of, processed in. And it was all kind of really militant and kind of organized in terms of that part of nationalism that they did. And at the end of the songs, there were these two guys in the front row that jumped up out of their seats, and one of them spread a Donetsk flag of Donetsk, the Donetsk region, and the other one held up this card that had a Z on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just like wow. And at the time, the narrative, Caleb had come out and said that in February that Russia did not invade Ukraine with 100,000 people. That absolutely was not happening. And that Ukraine had murdered 14,000 of its own people, and that the whole, Donbass region should belong to Russia. And so these were the tweets, that he had been posting leading up to this event, which he was completely wrong. So at the event, you had Caleb was there, and you had Jackson Hinkle was there, and Has was there. And I didn't know any of these guys. I'd looked up Jackson Hinkle a little bit on I knew he was from the San Clemente area in California. And I think I'd learned a little bit about Has, and from Trevor Loudon's KeyWiki website, his commentary. So I was beginning to learn about these guys, and so that's why I went, because it was the opportunity was there, and I just had to take advantage of it.
What did you manage to talk to the individuals, Caleb or any of the CPI members there? Did you manage to have conversations, or you just took the books, you kind of listened, absorbed the vibe, or?
I did. I didn't really talk to anybody, because now next time if I go, I definitely will. But I just was really feeling, nervous about it, and I didn't know what to expect. And not only that, but they actually allowed 4 really hard leftist people come in. And, the purple hair, Antifa looking creepy people. And they sat right next to me. And so they got kicked out, about a half an hour into the meeting. And this guy, one of their heavies, leaned over in my face and put his finger in my face, and he says, "Are you with them?" And I go, "Do I look like I'm with them?" No, I'm not with them, and they kicked him out of the meeting. But I noticed that everybody that spoke that day really brought their own unique perspective to how they feel about the type of pure socialism, they call it, that they want to build, and that they really think that they could get it right this time if they were in charge of things. Is that funny?
I know how it is. I just laugh. I just laughed at that.
Well, it was funny because they had 2 transgender people there, and one of them was named Shar Darling. And Shar Darling was at the front, and Shar Darling was a male to female transgender person in a really short skirt, And then this other person was a male to female person who got up and spoke as well, which I thought was, just kind of interesting, because Caleb is and Hinkle. They're pretty buttoned up, they wear suits and they're coiffed out, a little bit, and Has, he's just a t-shirt and, jeans kind of guy. And so it was just, they were all so different from one another, but yet they, the way that they conducted the meeting was, very orderly, and they made you recite the CPI pledge. Put your hand up and recite the CPI pledge, which that was pretty funny too.
That must have been kind of cringe if you had to do that, and you're like, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to do this crap. Oh my God. No, don't do it. I don't want to say I don't believe this shit.
They're very colorful people, I gotta say, and yeah, they are smart, and they really believe what they believe, but now, what I wonder now, I mean, Jackson Hinkle has become so radical. I just wonder if he and Caleb and Has, are still on the same page. I don't. And no, Daniel Burke,
they had a breakup. They actually had a breakup. I don't know exactly why. But Caleb now does his own thing. Now, Caleb, Haas, and Hinkle, they used to collaborate with Daniel Burke, who's a Larouchian, and I suspect that's possibly where they got the classical music. Not that I dislike classical music, but that was always a big thing and still is with the LaRouche organization slash Schiller Institute, if you will, is constant playing
Right.
classical music. So, but Haas, now Henkel and Haas are aligned. They formed a new group called the American Communist Party. And I've had some interesting things that I've heard that through a source that I won't discuss online because I could discuss it privately with you, but they are growing very fast. They have a tremendous media like that on X, Twitter. They have grown like that very quickly somehow, I
Wow.
would say in quotation marks. Yeah, they form their own thing. There is bad blood between them. I don't know exactly why. I know Caleb accused Hawes of raping a CPI member, and I think it was at the conference in Austin, or he repeated it. I mean, Caleb didn't agree with that point of view that it occurred, but he mentioned that Haas was accused, not that he was endorsing it. And I guess Haas got upset that even Caleb mentioned that it was even an accusation. See, Caleb had a bit of a scandal where CPI had to dissolve back in, I think, 2022, I want to say, where he was accused of sexual misconduct or just having certain, unorthodox sexual whatever, spanking, if you will. And that came out, and that came out, and that came out by, there was on Medium, there was a group of CPI members and officials that wrote the supposed allegations of all these strange things about him, accusations, and that just blew the group apart. It temporarily
Yeah.
dissolved, and then of course it reconstituted itself. It is building itself up, it seems, and they're very, very organized. They all kind of have the same approach, though, that
Right.
instead of wrapping themselves up with this sort of Maoist, Stalinist ideology, or let me retract Maoism, Stalinism, this sort of left communist ideology that Antifa, which has a very strong Maoist strain to it, or like the Revolutionary Communist Party,
Right.
they're wrapping themselves up in the American flag because they want to break off the Trump populist movement or quote unquote populist movement, and they want to have united fronts with that segment of the population to bring about a communist revolution. Because they all say that part of the MAGA movement is composed of the working class, and they accept that as a reality, and they want to include that. They see that the woke left, or the woke brand of communism, is antagonizing most Americans. Caleb
Right.
would say, I would hate communists if they were all woke. And I would argue, these are hooks to get well-meaning people. The Larouchians did this back when they were known as the National Caucus of Labor Committees, back when they were communists. And they had this, there were several leaked memorandums, like their famous 1975 leaked security staff memorandum of the National Caucus of Labor Committees, where they called about in an effort to expose the Rockefeller clique back in the 1970s. We're going to align with the conservatives, the John Birch Society, George Wallace's American Independent Party, in this whole united front. And this is where I think Caleb and the CPI are more formidable, is because their strategy makes sense
Yeah, it does.
from a marketing point of view.
Right.
But I would argue, and if any CPI members are listening, I'm sure they would be apoplectic if I say this, but functionally the Antifa slash Red Guard and the CPI, functionally they want the same thing. Functionally, the economy, the society, and the political system will be very similar. It still would be a one-party totalitarian regime um, that would be extremely oppressive, that will not solve the problems of the injustices that do exist in this society, because I just have history on my side to prove that over and over and over again. Um, so that's my impression of them based on, and I listen to their programs. I like to listen to people on the left and whatnot. A friend of mine who used to be a communist, he's no longer alive. He left the PCUSA, which was a Stalinist breakaway of the CPUSA, or even more Stalinist, I should say, breakaway of the Communist Party USA. It's called the Party of Communist USA. So I kind of have some understanding, and I've had people that were neo-fascist types that my program used to be called the Populist Patriot, and they would contact me. They also would like my books too as well, because I write about the history of fascism and National Socialism and how they're anti-capitalist. And they'll get my books, and anybody who knows anything about my personal life, I'm like the furthest thing from those people. For one, my economics and politics would make me an ANCAP compared to those people, and anarcho-capitalist comparatively on everything. Two, I mean, just my personal life in general, which I won't get into at this point for the sake of time, it just would not be a good fit. So I sit down and I always say, why do you join them? Why do you join? There's one person who's involved with New Frontier USA, another one who was thrown out of the military, and it was actually made the news locally where he is from. And I think he was in with Identity Europa, amongst other groups. And I always ask.
They tried to grab a hold of me, those people. Yeah.
And I ask, why do you join these groups? Well, one used to be a Republican, but the callous free down here in Florida, and I was semi-active as a Republican, and this is unfortunately true. I've met a lot of good Republicans and whatnot, don't get me wrong, personally they like, but this did exist side by side. And what he told me is in the west coast of Southwest Florida, that a lot of the Republican leadership there, and a lot of the ones that he met that were very wealthy, were Jewish people. They were ultra free market, laissez-faire, libertarian, and they were very callous towards the plight of the working class. And I saw that too, and I can do a show about that if, I have actually discussed that in my last book, and I've discussed it periodically on my show. The other individual came from Ohio, and he had told me that most of his family, many in his family, worked various positions in General Motors. So when General Motors started to really ramp up their outsourcing of jobs, combined with what he felt the cultural degeneracy of multiculturalism and the LGBTQ folks and whatnot, that combination just pushed him away from being a run-of-the-mill paleo-conservative all the way towards more of a neo-fascist national socialist position, to the point where he would celebrate a Russia-China takeover of the United States. He is dead set in his hatred against any form of classical liberalism and the United States. And with me, and I'm interested like you in policy, but I also, unlike a lot of anti-communists, I think the way to beat back these people is to outflank them without becoming them. And that's one of the reasons where I think like people like Otto von Bismarck in Germany with his flaws, Franklin Roosevelt with his flaws, Teddy Roosevelt, they kind of got it right. And that's one of the reasons why I've kind of moved away from a lot of the run-of-the-mill conservative. I was also a supporter of Trump too as well. I thought he was very much a centrist kind of guy. He said in 1999 in an interview that, the far right is not getting it, the far left is not getting it, there has to be something in between. So that resonated. And I heard him at a Tea Party rally in 2015 in Boca Raton down here in South Florida. And I could tell you a lot of the Tea Partiers did not like what he had to say, because they had this very sort of free trade, very corporations can do no wrong kind of thing. And he was talking about rebuilding our infrastructure, our trade relationship with Red China, and everything that needs to be revised. And a lot of things that really resonated with me. But he was kind of like a right-wing version of Bernie Sanders in the sense that he was, you know, here's a guy who didn't have the, the hard left background that Bernie Sanders did in the 1970s and 1980s. Although, by Bernie Sanders standards, since he entered Congress, he actually, believe it or not, he actually moved, quote, to the right on certain issues. If you look at some of his speeches and votes, and now the hardcore communists, they actually hate him. When you look at their literature, and even what Caleb Maupin even says, he calls them a sewer socialist, which is a derisive term given within the socialist movement. So that's what happened with, from my standpoint, with kind of my political journey. So I look at this and I say that with organizations like that, you have to really outflank them. And I really started to dig into why, online at least, why people join groups like DSA, which I would never want to come to power. And I sat to myself and I'm like, oh my God, this is so easy to solve. Here you have one person who was a chapter leader in Philadelphia, said they got their degree in to be an electrical engineer, not basket weaving, like the conservative trope that you'll see on Fox News.
Right.
All these degrees that are useful and legitimate concerns, and these are people that are working even 2 or 3 jobs. I talk about it
Right.
in my essay. I know your time is limited with what you can read and whatnot, but I go into that, and I have more coming down the pike. And it's like, this is where, and this is one of the main reasons why I do my writing and my channel, is to really kind of give people another perspective. It's like, hey, wait a minute, we gotta like push our leaders, and whether Republican or Democrat, to really say, if you're belly aching and concerned about, oh my God, younger Americans are becoming more attuned to socialism or communism, which I agree is a bad thing. Okay, but how do we solve it? And I feel that what I've encountered is on the right, personally, as well as even looking afar, is a very mixed response. Some will listen and understand, but others are so paralyzed by ideology or just not wanting to say, okay, you guys are right, your solutions suck and are abhorrent, but we got to do something with the existing system and go into history, see what has worked in my eyes, because, if you will. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on that. I don't know what your observations are or feelings on that, but my concern is groups, as conditions potentially deteriorate in this country, you're going to have extremist groups like the ones that you've encountered in Austin grow in size, and that's my big concern.
Time has been favorable to us, because Daniel Burke at the meeting, back to the CPI meeting here.
Sorry.
His solution was that the only way that America is going to survive is if it aligns, locks arms with Russia and China, and goes down the Belt and Road agenda. Okay, we got a Belt and Road our way everywhere, right? And we know what happens with the Belt and Road situation. You have, like in Cambodia, you end up with a police surveillance state, and we could that's another thing that we can talk about, and that's really, really interesting, the whole Belt and Road thing. And that was his solution. Okay, and of course he was very different from Has and Caleb and everybody else. Well, that's not really resonating very well right now, with now that we know that China is supplying Russia and everybody else with parts for drones that are attacking Ukraine, because the soldiers are telling us, we're taking all this Chinese parts and everything. They know that China is supplying Russia with the means to continue its assault on Ukraine, and that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is beyond obscene. So, these guys, I mean, with their pro-humanity stance and abundance for everyone, which is their big tagline, how does that resonate with you now, Caleb? And, of course, Hinkle has gone full-blown Hitler on everybody, and he is a genocidal maniac, this kid. And he's making money doing it, and I can see where Haz and Caleb would have a problem because with Caleb's, personal problems or whatever, because when Haz came out that day, he talked about how filthy the far left was and how immoral the far left was and how that they are just the scum of the US, and they were going to destroy this country. And of course has the answer to everything, and he is, the king of the word salad, which was really funny to watch him and Trevor go at it, because on the Tim Pool show, Haz and Trevor kind of went at it, and Trevor just derailed him really super quickly, and there was a camera on Haz's face, and he just had that Scooby-Doo look, and Tim Pool was like, well, Haz, who's going to tell me how much I can make off my channel? Who are really actually going to be those people in charge? And so none of their solutions for, who's going to control the production and who's going to control the wealth, none of it works. But yet they just keep it up, and they keep it up, and they keep it up. They had a young man there who had recently, he's from San Angelo area here, and he had gone down into Nicaragua. And he was there to tell you that Nicaragua was peaceful, that it was a free and open market, that there was this hybrid capitalist socialist situation. Everybody had free health care. There was plenty of food for everybody. It was safe. It was clean. It was just this utopian, beautiful society. And he was convinced that we could go there, that we could actually go there, and this country could be just like Nicaragua, and it was a better country. And my thought was, well, why don't you just move there then? Why are you going to stay here in San Angelo? Well, he was going to go back up to San Angelo and run for city council.
There you go.
So yeah, it was interesting, all of their ideas and the things that they say are not going well right now, because I don't know how you could not help but see what Russia has done to Ukraine at this point.
They're still going at it, and what they're trying to do, it seems, is capitalize on the element of the American population, including a portion of the American right, that is anti-Ukraine, that buys all the myths that Russia's propagandists say about Ukraine, that will use the sort of foreign aid exhaustion, if you will.
Yeah.
Well, we're spending all this money on Ukraine, and how come we're not spending it on all these social programs at home to help our people and everything else? And they're trying to use these arguments as hooks. That's what I say. That's why I could never trust these people. And, it's very rich that Haz will say that, that these leftists are filthy and whatnot and blah, blah, blah. But in every communist takeover, you always have that kind of corruption and debauchery, no matter if they're dressed sloppy. But let me tell you, those sloppiness, they'll become suits and ties once they come into power, usually with $5,000 Rolex watches and driving around in Mercedes Benzes and all kinds of other cars and whatnot.
Yeah,
And
hiring expensive prostitutes. Yeah, they're gonna go all for it. And we've dumped billions of dollars into social services, programs here in the United States. And I mean, you just look at what's happening on the streets of England right now. You know, um, it is violence, and the project housing, is not the utopia that they said it was going to be. When everything is provided for people that are not willing to work, they don't have the intellect to work, and they, how is that going to be the utopia that you want? And what's it going to be like when you start telling people what they're going to do? Well, maybe China has done pretty well with that. I don't know. Safe and orderly society. We don't know. It's not going to work like that here. We've been a free nation for far too long, and it's just not going to work like that. The utopia that they want is not going to happen.
yeah, and that's the thing. In China, I would argue that, look, it took years afterwards for the Chinese communists to suppress the last remnants of the Kuomintang. I mean, even into the early 1950s, the Chinese Red Army was still fighting off various rebels and oppositionists in that particular country. There still was political opposition in that country for years and years, and there still is in China. Uh, the problem is it's an ironclad totalitarian state. There's also a lot we don't know because it's very opaque. So
Right.
there's the political opposition, and other political opposition formations we just don't know about it. They've learned to scientifically perfect control. They understand the human psyche, the human wants, the human fears, and they use it against the population. When it comes to, ideal society, I think you have to go what works with history. You're never going to have a perfect society. You're never going to have a utopia and whatnot. I tend to be distrustful of utopian purists, if you will, especially coming from the Marxist-Leninist or National Socialist or fascist or Islamic side, because it's always becomes like Animal Farm or 1984. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in that society. It's one of the books that actually made me a strong anti-communist. And Orwell was a social democrat, by the way, until his dying days, but realized that socialist totalitarianism was a massive threat to the free world. If I had to pick a point in American history where things were functioning, where the country was on continuous improvement, I would say that would be in the mid to beginning of the middle part of the 20th century and into the beginning of the latter part of the 20th century. And then for many reasons, things have started to, in certain areas, take a nosedive. And, that's a topic for a different show. But what was your impression of Daniel Burke? I mean, the Laurentians have always been on that. Let's do the land bridge as they proposed for
Yeah, the land bridge, right.
between Russia and China and the United States. What was your impression of Daniel Burke?
He's a tall, handsome guy, and I believe he was, what wasn't he, a congressman at one point? He held some kind of political office, and I don't believe he was reelected. But he's an attractive, uh, you know, man who is soft spoken. He's not really compelling, as a speaker. He makes his arguments, and then he gets off stage, and he didn't really convene very much, with the others, and uh, but I didn't, there wasn't really anything that he said that impressed upon me, very much, really. He's kind of, vanilla kind of things where, he doesn't say extreme or outrageous things. but he believes in a different type of society than what he's living in.
Now, you mentioned that in your opinion on this, and I thought it was interesting. You said they are hard to dislike, and I found we shared common ideological adversaries. So I
Yeah,
thought it was interesting because that showed that, while you're, of course, like me and many of our other viewers and collaborators, hardcore anti communists and anti fascists, but it's almost like you were listening with an open mind when you said that. And I appreciated that. You don't find a lot of anti communist articles that really will make mention of that. So, what did you have in mind when you said that?
about
Com-
him just about him just being vanilla.
no, about having common ideological adversaries. The CPI, they are hard to dislike, and I found we shared common ideological adversaries. I thought that was an interesting statement.
Well, they just, I mean, essentially they want a safe and orderly society, so they say, and they want the wars to stop. They want the money to be more equally divided so that everyone has abundance for all, that there's no reason for and this was a Burke's thing as well, too. There's no reason for anywhere in the world for anybody to live in poverty and to the degree of poverty that certain countries have. There's no reason for that whatsoever. And that all of these problems should have been solved by now. And so they want to bring forth their ideas for solving these problems of war and human suffering, and their ideas to get there. There's a huge gap in that, and this is, of course, what revolution is about, in terms of like the Red Guards and people like that. Got to absolutely demolish and tear down the existing system before we can get to a new system, kind of like, which is some of the arguments, some of the things that I've been learning the last year in my travels over to Ukraine and Romania and places like that. The peace process doesn't start after the war stops. The peace process is a long process that takes a lot of work, and it's very complex, and things have to be put into place, before war, ends, or there's a ceasefire. You've got to have a plan for after the shooting stops. Well, these guys, who haven't even started the shooting yet, and they aren't really involved in anything other than theory and narratives and whatnot, and their fascination with reading anything and everything communist that's out there and adopting those ideologies. They don't really have, plans for how to get from point A to point Z. They just have theories about how it's all supposed to work in the end. you know so, so and you do have other think tanks. I mean, Europe is full of think tanks on all of what's in between. How can we fix this problem over here to get to this problem over here? Caleb and those guys aren't smart enough to be in, and probably even Burke. I don't know, maybe Burke is involved in some of these things. We don't know what think tanks that they're in, but these guys are not really involved in writing plans and policy. They're more about what is wrong with our society, and look at what's beautiful over here in Venezuela or Nicaragua, or countries that are being ravaged by Boko Haram, that all of a sudden all these people have the right idea and our country has all the wrong ideas. So these guys are, they might be sort of kind of intellectual, you know, but when it comes down to it, especially with Has, it's just a bunch of word salad. Okay, it really is, and he uses all these big words, and he says, and it's got all this stuff stringed together that really the average person is can't absorb what he's saying. If he's now, when I saw him speak in Austin, he was not like that. Okay, when he's across the table from Trevor, he's going to bring the word salad game for whatever reason, to look smart, to look philosophical, to look like he's, an intellectual, or to just cause chaos and confusion and eat up time on the microphone, where Trevor's just going to throw some jujubes under those roller skates in a sentence and just derail the guy. Well, when I saw Has, he spoke very plainly. I thought all of those guys spoke very plainly, and they brought their message about how screwed up America is because of capitalism, and communism is the answer. It is the answer, and folks, we're going to get it right this time. That's the message.
That's exactly it.
Everybody's got some kind of grievance, but when I looked at all the people that were sitting in the crowd, they just looked like very average Democrats, working class people who are hardcore Democrats. That's the audience that I saw. Of course, that could have been because it was Austin. Okay. And they just easily fall for this stuff because they hate our country.
Yeah,
it's that simple.
It's a shame. It's such a shame. So,
but yeah, it was anyway. A show. It was fun to go, see those guys in action, and they put on this event and they put on this show, and all this stuff happened. The dudes with the guns and everybody else. They had these men in black standing around with sunglasses and it was just really funny. And all these things are, I mean, really, Nevin, if you don't go out to a riot, you're missing out. I mean, because there's just so much drama going on. It's because people are so screwed up, and they're out there just losing their minds. And so I've seen a lot of that in Austin, and people getting wound up and worked up, and then going out there and throwing rocks at the police, and so we've kind of defined them into categories. I mean, you have the people who are organizing the event, and then you have the rock throwers, and and the people who are come out, and they're you'll see groups of them who've taken some kind of drug before they come out, and then all of a sudden they start peaking, out there, and they're on acid or whatever they're on, and they're peaking, and all of a sudden you can see them get all wound up. And you have the people that come out and they're drinking alcohol and smoking weed, and they're just literally out of their minds. And it's a problem, and you're seeing that in the UK right now, and that's what Antifa were about. They were definitely the rock throwers, these leaderless resistance groups, right? But while Caleb and those guys might be dangerous, I guess, how big is their audience really at this point? I think that when I have seen Caleb's past, where he's on RT, not making very much money, I'm sure of it, or he's been down and sat with big leaders in third world countries, for whatever reason that is. To me, I look at it as it's just one night, and it's just a gig, and it's going to be over with, and it's going to go into the dustbin of history, because their stuff doesn't work. and they know it doesn't. I mean, they've got to know it doesn't work, but they're passionate about it. I think our hope with them is that at some point they're going to get older, they're going to burn out, and people are going to separate and they're going to go different ways, and they will no longer be relevant at all. And that's what's going to happen to them. Someday Has is not going to have a microphone anymore.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. So it's always, because there's always a new communist or fascist personality that always kind of unfortunately steps in their shoes.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, my concern. They are growing in numbers. Are they a numerical majority? Obviously not, but their ideas are catching. It's a concern of ours. And yeah, with Haas, he's a particularly distasteful, like Caleb, Haas called for the defeat of the United States in one of his Substack articles. And I think an article called The Fraud of Luna Oy. And I actually passed that on to Trevor. I didn't even know he had a debate until I think the day of the debate. And I'm like, oh my God, I wish I sent this to Trevor. No, because I think Haas needs to answer for that. You don't call for your own defeat of the country, revolutionary defeatism in a war with China or any other country. I'm sorry, that's treason. So.
He's not gonna want to live under Russian or China rule. I mean, if they really believe that passionately about it, go live there. Go live there and then come back and give us a report. But I am not by any means minimizing the communist problem that we have here in the United States. It is big, and it's a problem. I mean, it's obviously destroying our universities. It's destroying our youth, and it is a huge problem. And we need to do something about it. Now, one of the things that does work is like with the Hamas supporters here in the United States who are supporting Hamas, the Students for Justice in Palestine, the National Students for Justice in Palestine, the American Muslims for Palestine, and the AKP party out of Turkey, and then all of the communist groups that support them, Code Pink, Democratic Socialists of America, the RevComs, all of them, the groups from Beijing and the groups from Russia, the groups from Latin America, and the African groups, who all have long-standing roots in the anti-war movement of the 1970s. This is their time right now for a resurgence of their movement, which I recently wrote about in the Witches and Wizards and the Flying Monkeys article. These groups are funded by the anti-war movement, which is the most, in my view, from what I've seen in my research, the most heavily funded non-government organization movement in the world, in the hundreds of billions of dollars. They've got a lot of money. So if you jump on this anti-war campaign, you can get a piece of that pie. Hello, Steve Bannon. Hello, Charlie Kirk. Hello, Alex Jones. All of a sudden, all these people on the right are anti-war. Okay, and you start putting out that message, then you just might be a Russian communist, and as we've seen on Alex Jones and Owen Schroyer, they're interviewing all these people now. They're interviewing Hinkle. They're interviewing Caleb. Alex Jones was on the Solovyov, pro-Russian. These are genocidal maniacs, some of these people that they are talking to and having conversations with. Jack Posobiec, all these people that the MAGA crowd just blindly follow, because you've got Steve Bannon, who's in jail now, by the way, in federal prison by the way, right now, coming out and going, we're the ones with the truth, okay? We're the only ones with the truth. The mainstream media is bad. We're the new media now. We're the only ones with the truth, and y'all Christians need to listen to us. Well, the watchdogs out there have done quite a bit of expose on Posobiec and Jones and Bannon and all these people, and they are not who they say they are. Okay, they are liars. And so when you have your rock star is not who you think he is, you might want to not be in their crowd anymore, in their audience anymore. And you just might need to separate yourself from those people. And thank God for Elon Musk, because he's kind of the media right now. He's kind of the mainstream media right now on Twitter. And a lot of my friends who still watch Bannon every single day and hang on every word that comes out of Jack Posobiec's mouth or Alex Jones or all these people, none of these people are on Twitter looking at the violence that's going on in the UK or looking at the military reports that are coming out constantly from the open source cell phone evaluation going on the battlefield in Ukraine. They want to hang on to the personality that they like, that they think that is telling them the truth. And you and I agree that we need to focus on policy over personality. And I think that hopefully we are starting to see that now. When you have somebody like Trevor Loudon and Jeff Nyquist and myself and all these people that we know that have been writing about this for years, when you see their numbers decline in their audience and that kind of thing, it lets you know that even your own audience is going to have loyalties to people that they like, and their sources of information are very narrow. And, some of us have more time than others to go out and absorb the, information that's out there. And so our sources are really, really, really important. And if I were to see Has or Jackson Hinkle, who I think is just a very
Disgusting.
sad, disgusting young man. These guys are young, okay? Caleb Has, these guys are young. They're in their 30s, approaching their 40s. And what they don't know is by the time they're in their late 50s, their late 60s, and their late 70s, they're going to look back on their lives and the crusades that they have waged and what they've done and what they've believed in. And they're going to wonder, well, that was embarrassing. I shouldn't have done that, or I shouldn't have went down that path because it was wrong. Are they going to be willing to say they were wrong and they're sorry? Because
you're a much nicer person than I am, and I tend to like most people that I come across, but those are people that I get the vibe from a viewer. People like Haas, people like Hinkle, especially Hinkle, they're not going to say they're sorry. They're not going to say they're sorry. Yes, you have a lot of communists that have said over the years, they've written books about it. Some have gotten assassinated abroad for saying their things, for saying sorry, and writing about it and spilling the beans on what happened in the communist or fascist or Islamic dictatorships. But I think with the vast majority of them, they're not going to say sorry. You're right. They do have a very good gig. And I think they just want power and they crave power. And that's what it comes down to. And I think, when you look at this, and Jeff Nyquist really does a good job at this. I've talked about it. Trevor Loudon has done a good job talking about it as well. He's told some horror stories of what's gone on with the Socialist Unity Party in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And these people just want power. They're not going to say they're sorry. They're psychopaths. And,
right.
I have no... you can't really work with these people. Sure, around the edges, you might agree with critiques, but at the end of the day, their solutions, they do work in a sense. They work in the sense that they preserve absolute power. And when they're losing power, they always find a way to morph, like what happened in Eastern Europe in late 1989 into 1990. They morphed themselves into the economic structures in Eastern Europe through this controlled privatization system or process. Same thing in Russia. The fall of communism, I agree with people like Jeff and Trevor. I've written about this for years too, as well, a lot, and spent many countless hours and time, even to this day, researching this. And, and it confirms more of what they say, meaning loud people like Trevor and Jeff, than what the opposite side says. In the Soviet Union, many of the same structures are still intact. Yeah, I agree with you about Twitter. Just they have the Ukrainians will play these clips of Soliyev on Russian TV, on the state television, basically laying bare what they want, and it's horrific.
It's
But
horrific.
they all know this. I think people are not as stupid as people give credit. I think Haas is a smart guy. I think Caleb is a smart guy. I really get that from their words. I just think they have a vision for society. They also are in it for power. When you listen to these people, in some cases, they come from privileged families or middle class families or very well off families. That's the sense I get with some of them not the case. Caleb, I mean, we could talk about this offline, and because I got to get to work. But you also have a lot of troubled people, and they get hooked into these causes, which they think they will be the top boss. I mean, I hate to sound crude in my analysis, but communist and national socialist movements, they tend to attract a lot of idealists, particularly on the ground level with the activists, but the leaders, you have people like Igor Glagolov, who was high up in the Soviet Communist Party, who defected. You have a whole bunch of people. Trevor has talked about this. He's met communists. These are people that are morally just decrepit individuals.
Right.
That's what it comes down to. They're not good people. They're smart. They know how to manipulate people and take advantage of valid grievances. And one of the many reasons why I don't associate with the far left, I could never become a far leftist. You look at what Karl Marx says in the manifesto, what he actually calls for: the despotic inroads against private property, the misuse of progressive taxation, not to raise revenue per se, but to destroy capitalism. It's two different things. The creation of industrial armies. I mean, hello, that's slave labor. So I look at that and I say, people that get attracted, they know what Karl Marx calls for. It's like a one-page thing. I read it in college. And I'm like, ooh, like, yeah. Now it was back then when I was a loyal conservative Republican. And even this day, it still doesn't resonate to me, because you're right, it's not going to work in this country. It's those kinds of ideologies and systems of control are not going to work in any free society whatsoever.
I think that you really have to define the enemy. It's a war, and the enemy just needs to be crushed, and so do their ideals. And unfortunately, in tolerant societies like we are, we have these policies of containment that we can see don't work, especially when it comes to someone like Russia, and or someone like Putin. I mean, when I am interfacing with just average people in my community, that will come out and they'll make a flat out Marxist statement that they don't really know is a Marxist statement. You have to arm yourself with some tools. I think spend some time and arm yourself with some kind of language to kind of combat that, because it works. And we are in an ideological war right now. And I think having the conversation is really, really important, because people are falling to the wrong side. And that's a problem.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. To close up, any comments you want to make regarding where we can find your work and your videos, your interviews, a plug for Conservatives for Ukraine, etc.
Oh, right. So we have a Conservatives for Ukraine, and that letter 4 on Facebook, and we're actually going to have event today, a roundtable event today, which will be online. Um, we have I'm on the Centrist Inc. on Twitter, and my website is Lauren Comele Morris, and that's spelled Comele, laurencomelmorris.com, and that's where you can find most of my writings, and I'm also on Facebook and Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. I think
Yeah.
this is a great conversation. Hopefully we'll have some more conversations in the future. I have a feeling we can go on and on exchanging ideas. And I definitely want to hear, you mentioned your travels, if I recall correctly, to Ukraine, Romania. I think that would definitely make a good show to pierce through a lot of this prevalent disinformation sponsored by the Russians and their assets on really what's going on. So I hope we can do a show about that, because I think getting the live coverage would be very helpful for the national conversation.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun.
Okay, my pleasure. You take care. God bless. Be safe, everyone. And as one of my favorite radio shows, which used to exist and I used to appear on, Make the Call, the host would say, be good to one another. Thank you much.